It's my great honor to introduce Terry Tempest Williams.
John, thank you. That was overwhelming, and I love you. And we were reminiscing that on the 40th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act, we were together with your parents, with your mother, in Washington, D.C. to celebrate. And I'm so grateful to be here with you now at the 50th, here in what I love to think about as my home of my heart in Santa Fe. So I'm nervous, I'm humbled to be before you. So many dear friends here, too many to name, but please know my love and how much you've influenced my life. I would just want to say, John, thank you for your pragmatic vision, because you have made all the difference. And I remember when you and I were where Wally Stegner was speaking at the Moab Slough. And I just have to tell you this personal humor, because it's, Stegner was one of my heroes, and he played tennis with my grandfather, and he was larger than life. And I remember how excited we were that he was speaking on behalf of the Moab Slough. And Mary, his wife, was there, and I was sitting next to her, and we were hanging on, John and I and everyone that was there, we were hanging on every word he said. And she whispered in my ear, blah, 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 when is he going to sit down? And I just thought, that's what family is, right? So with that, I can relax. And if it's too much blah, you'll know what. Just raise your hand. But John, we love you and we appreciate you. I also want to thank Lindsay and Kristen for putting this beautiful gathering together, and they are miraculous, I am here to tell you. And my dear friend, Betsy Quammen, whom I love, you are the board of this fantastic organization of Wild Earth Guardians. That in itself will be a gift for this organization. And just so you know, she has a book coming out in October called True West, and it is wonderful. So we honor you. We're here tonight to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act. And for the next 30 minutes, I just want to reflect on why I think this act is the world's most accomplished and dignified conservation law. We're here to honor and, as John said, recommit ourselves to this life-saving work of protecting species. And that is the heart and soul of Wild Earth Guardians. I love this organization, and I've been aware of it for 20 years. And I can tell you that when I was working on and with the Utah prairie dogs, this is where I came to understand that species and what we needed to do to protect them. We honor this extraordinary staff and board and you donors who, without you, this could not occur. What I love about this organization is that it's local, and that those of you who are here have this deep connection as New Mexicans and tied to Santa Fe. That matters. I also love as a Westerner that it is regional. It's also national, and the work that is being done here has global significance. To have this kind of an intimate organization that does such global work is rare. On this anniversary, I'm thinking about extinction and what it means for a species to vanish from existence. Say their names: great auk, passenger pigeon, Great Plains wolf, Steller's sea cow, Panamanian golden frog, Utah lake sculpin, all extinct since the 1800s. Imagine an individual, animal, or insect or plant, alone, reaching, wandering, wondering if they are the last of all the living members of their kind. Certainly they must know, sense, or fear this fact. What must it be to surrender to one's isolation by way of a howl, or a cry, or a flight, or a bloom, to attract a response, a glimmer or glint of kin? We know the sixth extinction is upon us. It is true, species extinction has been a natural part of the Earth's evolutionary history, as evidenced by the disappearance of dinosaurs in the Cretaceous era 65 million years ago, to the extinctions of the great megafauna, such as mammoths and mastodons, in the late Pleistocene, who inhabited the last ice age some 10,000 years ago. But scientists today report the accelerated loss of biodiversity is 1,000 times faster than the natural rate of approximately losing 1 to 5 species annually. Grief is part of extinction that, when understood and witnessed, becomes an emotion that parallels love. Grief and love are siblings. When the last drab's fringe-limbed tree frog died in the care of the Atlanta Botanical Gardens on December 15th, 2015, I wept. I had visited the Atlanta Botanical Gardens that year, and I had met this single remaining member of this species, tenderly named Tuffy. He was holding on. His call penetrated the walls of the garden, and it was haunting, but there was never a call back in response. He was an endling. That word is a haunting, an endling. Now vulnerable, many on the brink of extinction in North America, is the Mexican wolf, red wolf, wood bison, grizzly, black-footed ferret, California condor, ocelot, Florida manatee, northern fur seal, loggerhead turtle, green sea turtle, giant sea bass, Oregon spotted frog, Oahu tree snail, rusty-back bumblebee, Heinz emerald dragonfly, Kirtland warbler, Eskimo curlew, woodstock, willow flycatcher, North Atlantic right whale, beluga whale, and elkhorn coral. Say their names. Remember their names. Loneliness inhabits my body as I whisper the names of the extinct and endangered, something better to do in a circle as ceremony as we pay our respects and contemplate their lives. How are we to survive without our companion species? On planet Earth, we are not above them or below them, but side by side, fellow creatures caught in the uncertainty of this era of the Anthropocene, where our human footprint lands heavy on Earth at this moment in time. Who cares? Why do we care? What secrets do they carry? And what do they know that we don't? Today, over 1,400 species appear on the endangered species list under the jurisdiction of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, all part of the Endangered Species Act, signed into law on December 3rd, 1973, by Richard M. Nixon. President Nixon wrote, and I'm sure many of you have heard these words, but I think they're worth repeating, quote, "This legislation provides the federal government with the needed authority to protect an irreplaceable part of our natural heritage, threatened wildlife." Just before putting down his pen to seal this landmark act, he said, finally, "Nothing is more priceless and more worthy of preservation than the rich array of animal life with which our country has been blessed." Again, who cares? Why do we care? The Endangered Species Act is an act of questions that moves us toward answers. Presence. When the Endangered Species Act passed 50 years ago in 1973, it marked a key inflection point in our history and culture. As we witnessed in our country, the catastrophic decline of some of our most iconic species: gray wolf, grizzly bear, American alligator, Florida manatee. We could feel how close we were to losing something irreplaceable. Call it divine specificity. We were losing companions, and with them, our kinship to nature, even our own. We care. We care because we love this beautiful, broken world. The Endangered Species Act is not about hope. It's about something deeper than hope. Engagement, action, love. A wild promise made that we as human beings believe no species should face extinction, something beyond death, where a species' entire genetic history of adaptation, dignity, and beauty could be erased, disappeared, gone. The Endangered Species Act is an act of love, a sole commitment to saving our natural heritage that is its own force of nature. In that moment, when the Endangered Species Act was signed into law, it's hard to believe, but it was almost a unanimous vote in the Congress. That feels impossible with where we stand now. That is where we need to return. To collectively decide that we would go and will go to any length to save the most vulnerable species and plants from extinction. Our own consciousness as a species changed with the Endangered Species Act. We said on that day, we are not the only species that lives and loves and grieves on this planet. How do we place a momentary value on what one wildlife is worth? I remember during the BP oil spill, British Petroleum determined that a brown pelican was worth $133.56. Never mind the 30 million years of evolutionary perfection. What is the value of a species? It's right to continue when weighed against the perfection of adaptive evolution. Over time, do we gauge it through dollars per board feet or the millennial standing of a redwood forest? Do we approve one more golf course in the desert or act on behalf of a community of threatened Utah prairie dogs in times of drought? How do we balance the health of a declining grizzly population against the wealth of private landowners in a state like Montana, where there is a desire for a second or third or fourth or fifth home in Paradise Valley? Respect, restraint, and accommodating the rights of other species continues to butt up against the rights of humans with our individual dreams and desires. The International Union of Concern for Nature, IUCN, has a red data book. Have you heard about it? I've been finding them, and I was telling Betsy, they are so heavy. I mean, you feel the weight of the loss of these species. And there is a red book on every single threatened species on the planet right now. In 1922, the IUCN has registered more than 142,500 species on the red list, with more than 40,000 species threatened with extinction. Think about that. 41% of those on the brink are amphibians. 37% are sharks and rays. 34% are conifers, forests. 33% of reef-building corals, 26% mammals, and 13% of birds. The breakdown is sobering. Why should we care? We care because we have co-evolved with the living world of animals and plants and fungi and corals and multitudes of microorganisms, many that have never been seen or defined or categorized or named. Can I tell you a secret? I just found out that I have a species named after me, and it's a lice. I'm so proud. So, the great majority of species of organisms, possibly in excess of 90%, remain unknown to science. The venerated scientist E.O. Wilson wrote before his death in 2022 that 90% were yet to be determined, to be seen, named, cataloged. He also coined, as you know, a word biophilia to mean the inborn affinity human beings have for other forms of life, an affiliation evoked according to circumstance by pleasure or a sense of security or awe or even fascination blended by revulsion. It is in our nature to care. It is in our nature to feel this affinity with other. We are going against our nature when we allow for extinction. We care because it is in our deepest nature to live and learn and evolve from the lives that surround us. We imitate animals through dance and song and stories. In ceremonies, their skins are donned. In fashion, we wear their prints and feathers. In art, we draw them, paint them, and sculpt them, making masks to honor them. And in every religious tradition, animals from snakes to lions to locusts and doves, we reference them. We fear them, we worship them, and bow. They are our teachers, our mentors, and guides capable of portending our future because they were here to meet us when we arrived. We are born human, the ecologist Paul Shepard writes. What we must learn is to be animal. If we learn otherwise, it will kill them and kill life on our planet called Earth. Learn their names, speak their names, remember their names, and act. On June 29th, 2023, I learned that the white pelicans that have inhabited Gunnison Island in the middle of Great Salt Lake for 12,000 years left. No breeding pelicans remain. What do they know that we don't? Who cares? Grief and love are siblings. Each of us responds to our own home ground. Let our acts be personal, using the life experience and love of where we call home to protect them. Family histories, natural histories. As a child, I watched the men I love in my family, my father, my uncle, my brothers and cousins, lift their high-powered rifles and shoot one prairie dog after another, and another and another, for fun, and then they walked away. They called them pop guts. On the way back to our camp, because I was with them, I stepped over their small, blood-soaked, blown-apart bodies left in the matted grasses of their prairie dog towns. And then a single prairie dog raised her head out of the burrow and stood up and faced me. I froze in place, where it was impossible not to meet her gaze. I must have been 10 years old. She disappeared underground. On that day, I made a vow, short of standing in front of my father's rifle, that I would be their ally. I've tried to keep that vow, and Wild Earth Guardians helped me. What I can tell you from a personal point of view, and I hope you don't mind, when I graduated from high school in 1973, the same year of the Endangered Species Act, that it was signed into law, at that time there were only 3,300 Utah prairie dogs left in 37 isolated colonies in the state of Utah. Due to political pressure from influential ranchers and developers, they were not listed on the original endangered species list. Prairie dogs were seen as vermin. In 1977, I lobbied the Utah legislature as a graduate student in education from the University of Utah. I had created a Utah prairie dog curriculum that my professor said was all but useless for the Salt Lake City School District. At the state capitol, not only was I met with revulsion and humor and disdain by various representatives who insisted on calling prairie dogs varmints, the Speaker of the House handed me a recipe for prairie dog stew. Finally, in 1984, the Utah prairie dog, 11 years later, was added to the Fish and Wildlife's endangered species list and remains on the IUCN Red List of threatened species today. In 2000, in a special millennial issue of the New York Times Magazine, the Utah prairie dog was featured as one of the 10 species most likely to become extinct by the next millennium. Their fate was to become a ghost species. I wrote a book on prairie dogs. Every month I send a picture of prairie dogs in various poses, one with a helmet and bazooka, to friends at the Utah Nature Conservancy, a playful nudge for protection. I did that for several years. Did any of these gestures make a difference? It made a difference to me. This was my wild promise that became a vow I made to the lone Utah prairie dog who survived my family's massacre. What is the difference between a promise and a vow? A promise is a specific declaration or assurance that one will do a particular thing or that a particular thing will happen. A vow is a solemn promise, a deepening gesture that one makes with one's whole being. Both are nouns, but what if we see them as verbs, an action that grows out of a commitment? A promise becomes giving one's word. A vow is an open-ended commitment over time that moves into the realm of a sacred obligation, dedicated to someone or something, especially a deity. If one believes, as I do, that the divine resides in all living things, then there are many gods among us in a myriad of shapes and sizes and forms. Perhaps you have often felt yourself watched. Perhaps you were right. Helen Mort, from her poem, This is Wild. Whether it is a wolf lodged deep inside our psyches or a mite invisible to our eyes, each species encompasses a life honed to perfection over millions of generations. Our wild promise within the Endangered Species Act to protect and keep safe threatened and critically endangered species from extinction can become vows of action. This is something deeper than hope. Could they be watching out for us as well? What do the white pelicans know that we don't? What I've learned from spending time in Utah prairie dog towns is that community matters. These communal animals watch out for each other. Each member of a colony has a carefully communicated role to play. By caring for their own kind, prairie dogs simultaneously create an environment where other species can thrive. They are a keystone species, as you know, that other species rely on for survival. Where prairie dogs dwell, over 170 different species dwell also, including black widows, pronghorn antelope, burrowing owls, badgers, meadowlarks, and rattlesnakes. Each species fulfills their ecological niche. Diversity equals stability. Prairie dogs continue to teach me we are nothing without community. And I felt that today. I'm coming back to have tea with some of my favorite women who are heroes. Community, both human and wild, in all its magnificent and infinite variety. Last week, at the Congressional 50th celebration of the Endangered Species Act, where lawmakers and scientists and grassroots organizers convened to honor this moment, Congressman Raul Grijalva from Arizona spoke, and he spoke powerfully. What he said was instructive, and I believed him. He said that the conservation movement, for the last decade or so, longer, has been viewed by many as narrow, with deep roots in a colonial mindset. In many ways, this is true. That it was too white, too male, and focused on other species, not our own. But he has seen a change, and so am I. What was once viewed as a narrow movement with colonial roots is now being seen as a wide framework for justice, justice for all. That in the diversity of the plants and animals, it is also speaking to the diversity of race, cultural inclusivity, with leaders and leadership emerging from women, from indigenous communities, from people of color, and oh, so many young people. 10 years ago, at that same gathering, it was largely people over 50, predominantly white. This year, I would say close to 70% were young people, people of color, members of indigenous communities, and women. I find this more than encouraging. This is the future. The Endangered Species Act is a cornerstone of this local, national, and global shift. Change is not easy. Ruptures occur. What worked 50 years ago, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago, may not be working now. We are eroding and evolving at once. We are in a new era of transformative leadership. Our discomfort and despair over what we are losing is now being met by a renewed energy in what we are gaining. More people, more diversity, more inclusivity, with a heightened consciousness that we are one of Earth's community, interrelated and interdependent on this beautiful blue planet we call home. We too are animals. We too are threatened, and the sooner we recognize these truths, the more human we will become. Climate change, as we know, is not something in the future. It is right here, right now. As Arundhati Roy said recently, the time of warning is over. We know this in the American Southwest. Drought and extreme temperatures are real. A stressed Rio Grande and Rio Colorado is real. The sixth extinction is real. Ask Wild Earth Guardians as they work to protect the grizzly bear with sister organizations like Save the Yellowstone Grizzly. We saw Mr. Funk win a prize. We're all in this together. He's one of their only staff members. The sage grouse, the most powerful individual in the American West, is putting the oil and gas industries on notice. The extraction industries do not hold the power they thought they had, but the sage grouse does. This beautiful dancing bird in the sage flats of the American West is bringing people together in a new way, ranchers and conservationists. This, too, is the future. The Earth crisis is not just an ecological crisis or a political crisis or even an economic crisis. It is a spiritual crisis. And here in Santa Fe, I know you understand this. We must act not only out of wise laws and the bedrock of science, but through the life force of our own hearts as we deepen our commitment to an ethical stance toward life, all life, in the name of community, again, both human and wild. In 2023, we celebrate the extraordinary successes of the Endangered Species Act of 1973. 50 years later, as the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and scientists have noted, this totemic law has prevented the extinction of 99% of the animals and plants under its care, with many now on the road to recovery. Think about that. It is a visionary act by visionary people who cared. This is not easy work. It is a monumental task that is ongoing daily, Wild Earth Guardians exemplify this, that we can be both fierce and compassionate at once, that we can be creative in our collaborative approaches as we work together to understand a different kind of power beyond our own species that inspires courage, awe, humility, and wonder. Realizing these wild beings are not underlings, as Henry Beston writes in The Outermost House, but other nations, moving, quote, in a world older and more complete than ours, unquote. The Endangered Species Act is more than a law. It is a beacon creating a path of light in dark times. And we are the bearers of this light. We can write a different ending to the stories of critically endangered species and all the miraculous creatures, large and small, whose populations are in decline. A new ending is possible once we begin to love and live differently. Remember their names. Say their names. Tonight we celebrate the visionary work of Wild Earth Guardians. The Endangered Species Act is an act of love. So is contributing with the gifts that are ours to this common cause that brings us here together. Tonight, we have an opportunity to exercise our own wild promise. The eyes of the future are looking back at us, and they are praying that we might see beyond our own time. Wild mercy is in our hands. Thank you. Thank you.